What lies in the void beyond the mortal realm, where the soul stands bare, stripped of all earthly burdens and illusions? Can a lifetime of rules and rituals crumble in the presence of a love so pure it redefines the very meaning of salvation? When the darkness of doubt consumes you, will you cry out for a light you've never known, or cling to the traditions that have bound you? What if the Savior you sought through obedience reveals a grace that shatters every expectation you've ever held? And as the truth unfolds, will you have the courage to embrace a freedom that could transform not just your life, but the lives of those around you? In the heart of an Amish community, a sacred journey begins. From the wreckage of a shattered life, a divine revelation emerges, unveiling a grace that transcends the rules of man. The Pennsylvania countryside stretches wide and quiet, its rolling fields cloaked in the frost of a cold winter morning, the air sharp with the scent of pine and the earthy musk of freshly turned soil. The rhythmic clop of horse hooves echoes on the dirt path, a steady beat beneath the creak of a wooden buggy, its wheels cutting through the stillness of a world untouched by the hum of electricity or the roar of engines. In the distance, the faint sound of hymns rises from a simple wooden barn, the voices of the Amish community blending in reverent harmony, a sacred melody that speaks of tradition, of obedience, of a life lived apart from the world. Beneath the gray sky, the wind whispers through the barren trees, carrying a chill that hints at an unseen force, a divine hand poised to alter the course of a life forever. Are you prepared to step into a light so radiant it could reveal the hidden burdens of your soul, drawing you into the embrace of a grace you've never known? O ye who listen, heed this sacred chronicle of a man whose life was bound by the rules of tradition, whose heart was weighed by the fear of falling short, and whose journey through the veil of death revealed a truth from the Savior himself, a truth that would set him free and call him to a mission of grace. In the heart of an Amish community in Pennsylvania, where the simplicity of life was both a shield and a sacred vow, Eli Yoder lived a life of quiet obedience, a life woven with the threads of tradition, a life where every action, every prayer, every choice was guided by the ordinum, the unwritten rules that shaped his world, the rules that he believed would lead him to salvation. Eli was born into this community, raised in a modest wooden home, where the glow of oil lamps cast long shadows on the walls, where the hum of electricity was a foreign concept, where the clop of horse hooves replaced the roar of engines, where life moved at the rhythm of the seasons, of planting and harvest, of worship and fellowship. From childhood, he had been taught the ways of the Amish, to dress plainly, to work diligently, to avoid the distractions of the outside world, to live a life apart, a life that honored God through obedience, through submission to the community, through a faith that was as much about tradition as it was about devotion. Eli's days were filled with the labor of the land, his hands calloused from plowing fields, from building barns, from crafting the simple furniture that furnished their homes. He rose before dawn, his breath visible in the cold morning air, to tend to the animals, to prepare the fields, to ensure the survival of his family, of his community, a community that relied on the strength of its members, on the unity of its faith, on the rules that kept them together. He wore the plain clothes of his people, a black hat, a simple shirt, suspenders that held up trousers unmarred by zippers or buttons, a uniform that spoke of humility, of separation, of a life dedicated to God. On Sundays, Eli joined his community in worship gathering, in a barn or a neighbor's home, their voices raised in hymns sung in High German, their prayers a chorus of devotion, their sermons a reminder of the importance of obedience, of following the ordinum, of living a life that pleased God. He knelt in prayer, his hands clasped, his head bowed, his heart seeking the approval of the Almighty, the assurance that he was on the right path, that his obedience would lead him to paradise. Eli believed with a conviction that had been instilled since childhood, that obedience to the rules was the key to salvation, that by following the ordinum, by living a life of simplicity, by avoiding the temptations of the world, he would earn God's favor, he would secure his place in heaven, he would be counted among the faithful. But beneath this outward devotion, beneath the rhythm of work and worship, beneath the certainty of his faith, shadows of doubt crept in, unseen but persistent, like whispers in the stillness of the night, like a cold wind that could not be ignored. Late at night, when the house was quiet, when the oil lamps had been extinguished and the world outside was cloaked in darkness, Eli would lie awake, his mind wrestling with questions he dared not voice aloud. Questions that threatened the foundation of his faith, questions that stirred a quiet unease in his heart. Was his obedience enough? Was God truly pleased with him? Or was he merely going through the motions, following the rules without truly knowing the one he sought to serve? His prayers often felt hollow, a recitation of words, a ritual performed out of duty, rather than a connection to the divine, a connection he longed for but feared he did not have. He wondered if his faith was strong enough, if his heart was pure enough, if his life was worthy of the salvation he sought. He had followed every rule, lived a life of simplicity, avoided the distractions of the world, but deep down, he feared he was falling short, feared that his doubts, his questions were a sign of weakness, a sign that he was not among the chosen, a sign that he would never truly know God. He buried these doubts, telling himself that questioning was dangerous, that the teachings of his community were the only path, that obedience was the key to salvation, that to stray from the rules was to stray from God himself. But on a cold winter morning, as the frost clung to the fields and the sky hung heavy with the promise of snow, Eli's life was about to change forever, in a way he could never have imagined, in a way that would shatter the foundations of his faith and reveal a truth he had never dared to seek. He awoke before dawn, as he always did, to tend to the animals, to prepare for the day's work, his hands moving with the ease of routine, his mind on the tasks ahead. He hitched his horse to the buggy, its wooden frame creaking softly in the morning air, and set out for town. The clop of hooves, a steady rhythm on the dirt path, the cold wind biting at his face, his breath visible in the frosty dawn. The road was quiet, the countryside still a world untouched by the noise of the outside, a world that felt safe, secure, a world he had always known. But as he rounded a blind curve, a truck came speeding into view, its headlights a stark contrast to the dim light of the morning, its engine roaring with a power Eli had never known, a force that would shatter the stillness and alter his life forever. He didn't have time to cry out, didn't have time to react before the truck collided with his buggy, a deafening crash that echoed through the countryside, a moment of violence that drowned out the world, a moment that sent his buggy spinning, its wooden frame splintering, its wheels breaking, a moment that plunged Eli into darkness, a darkness that felt like eternity, a darkness that would lead him to a truth he had never sought. The moment the truck hit, time seemed to stand still. The crash, a thunderclap in the morning air, the sound of splintering wood, of shattering glass, of metal against metal, a cacophony of destruction that swallowed the world. Eli expected pain, expected the agony of broken bones, the sting of torn flesh. But instead he felt nothing, a stillness that was both comforting and terrifying, a void that enveloped him, a silence that spoke of the unknown. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in his buggy, no longer on the road, no longer in the world he had known, but somewhere else entirely, a place that defied the rules of the reality he understood, a place that filled him with both awe and dread. It was dark, not the darkness of night, not the absence of light, but a suffocating darkness, a void that pressed against him from every side, a weight that seemed to seep into his soul, a cold dread that chilled him to his core. The air was heavy, thick with an unseen presence, a presence that felt oppressive, that felt alive with a malice he could not name. He tried to move, but the ground beneath him was not solid. There was no sense of direction, no up, no down, just an endless void. A space that seemed to stretch into eternity, a space that swallowed his every attempt to find footing, to find light, to find hope. He called out, his voice trembling, his heart racing, but his words were swallowed by the emptiness, echoing into the void, a void that offered no answer, no comfort, no escape. Confusion gave way to fear, a fear that gripped his heart, a fear that whispered of the unknown, of the judgment he had always feared, of the eternity he had been taught to seek. Where was he? Was this death? He had always believed that those who lived a good, obedient life would go to heaven, would stand in the presence of God, would be counted among the faithful. Hadn't he followed the ordning? Hadn't he done everything his community required? Everything the rules demanded? Why wasn't he in the presence of God? Why was he here in this darkness, in this void, in this place that felt like a prison for his soul? As he stood there trembling in the darkness, scenes from his life began to play out before him. Not like memories, not like fleeting thoughts, but as if he were watching them from a distance, a spectator to his own existence, a witness to the life he had lived. At first, he saw the moments he had been proud of, the moments that had defined him as a faithful Amish man, moments of obedience, of devotion, of a life lived according to the rules. He saw himself working the fields, his hands calloused from the plow, his back bent under the weight of the harvest, his heart filled with the satisfaction of a job well done, a job that honored the traditions of his people, a job that he believed honored God. He saw himself sitting in worship services, his voice raised in hymns, his head bowed in prayer, his hands clasped in reverence, a man who followed the rules, a man who sought to please the Almighty, a man who believed he was on the path to salvation. He saw himself helping his family building barns with his brothers, tending to the animals with his father, teaching his younger siblings the ways of the Amish. A life of simplicity, a life of community. A life he had been taught was holy. On the surface, it all looked good. Faithful, obedient, disciplined, a life that should have pleased God, a life that should have led to heaven, a life that should have secured his salvation. But then the scenes shifted, revealing moments he had long buried. Moments he had refused to acknowledge, moments that now stood before him, a mirror to the truth of his heart, a truth he could no longer ignore. He saw the times he had questioned, the nights he had lain awake, his mind wrestling with doubts, his heart filled with fear, wondering if the rules were enough, if God truly knew him, if his faith was strong enough to save him. He saw the moments he had hidden, the moments when his prayers felt hollow, when his obedience felt like a burden, when he wondered if he was merely going through the motions, pleasing others rather than pleasing God. A man who followed the rules but never truly knew the one he sought to serve. And then he saw something that shook him to his core, a revelation that pierced his heart, a truth that revealed the cost of his choices. Not just the good but the harm he had caused, the pain he had inflicted, the lives he had touched in ways he had never understood. He saw the ripple effects of his actions, the moments when his pride in following the rules had turned to judgment, when his rigid adherence to tradition had hurt those he loved, those he should have cared for, those who struggled with the same doubts he did, but were too afraid to speak, too afraid to question, too afraid to seek the truth. He saw the faces of his brothers and sisters in the community, men and women who had confided in him, who had shared their doubts, their fears, their struggles to live up to the rules, to be counted among the faithful. But instead of offering grace, instead of offering love, Eli had looked down on them, his heart filled with a quiet pride, believing himself better because he followed the ordinance so perfectly, because he appeared righteous, because he had done what was expected, what was required, what he believed would save him. Now he saw the truth, the pain his judgment had caused, the distance it had created, the walls it had built between him and those he loved. His faith had been shallow, focused on appearances, on rules, on the outward acts of obedience, rather than the inward reality of a relationship with God, a relationship he had never truly sought, a relationship he had never truly known. The weight of regret crushed him, a weight that pressed upon his soul, a weight that spoke of the life he had lived, the choices he had made, the harm he had caused, the truth he had missed. The darkness around him seemed to grow thicker, heavier, as though it were feeding on his guilt, as though it were a living thing, a force that sought to swallow him whole, to consume him with the weight of his failures, to trap him in the emptiness he had feared. He felt utterly alone, as though the void had become his prison, as though the darkness had become his eternity, a place where he would be forever separated, forever lost, forever bound by the mistakes of his past. For the first time in his life, Eli realized the truth, a truth that pierced his heart, a truth that revealed the futility of his efforts, the emptiness of his faith. He had relied on his own righteousness, on his own works, on the rules he had followed, rather than truly knowing God, rather than seeking the one who could save him, rather than trusting in the grace he had never understood. He fell to his knees, trembling in the darkness, his heart breaking with the weight of his regret, his voice crying out in desperation, "Jesus, if you are real, help me, please don't leave me here." His voice echoed into the void, a plea that seemed to vanish into the darkness, a cry that seemed to go unheard, a prayer that seemed to fall on deaf ears. For a moment there was only silence, a silence that pressed upon him, a silence that filled him with dread, a silence that spoke of the eternity he feared, of the separation he had brought upon himself, of the judgment he had always sought to avoid. But then something happened, something that Eli would never forget, something that would change him forever, something that would reveal the truth he had never known. A faint light appeared in the distance, small, like a single candle in a vast dark room, but it grew brighter and brighter. A radiance that pierced the darkness, a warmth that pushed back the void, a power that seemed to drive the shadows away. The darkness recoiled from the light, shrinking back as though it could not bear its presence, as though it were a living thing, fleeing from a force it could not withstand. The light advanced toward Eli, its glow enveloping him, its warmth filling him, its power lifting the suffocating weight of the darkness, allowing him to breathe, to hope, to feel a peace he had never known. The overwhelming fear, the crushing regret, the unbearable guilt began to melt away, replaced by a sense of peace, a sense of love, a sense of hope. That was unlike anything Eli had ever experienced, a peace that spoke of redemption, a love that spoke of grace, a hope that spoke of a Savior he had never truly known. And then he saw him standing within the light, a figure radiant with glory, a presence filled with a love so pure. It brought tears to Eli's eyes, a love that overwhelmed him, not with fear, but with a sense of being fully known, fully accepted, fully loved. It was Jesus, his presence a testament to divinity. His eyes filled with compassion, his voice a melody of authority and grace. He stood before Eli, his light surrounding them, his love filling the void, his power driving away the darkness, a power that spoke of the Creator, of the Savior, of the one who had come to set the captives free. His eyes met Eli's, and in that moment Eli felt as though he could see every corner of his soul, every moment of his life, every doubt, every fear, every act of pride, every failure. Yet there was no condemnation in his gaze, only compassion, only love, only a grace that Eli had never known. "Eli," he said, his voice both gentle and firm, a voice that resonated with the power of eternity, yet offered the comfort of a father's embrace. "Why have you relied on the works of your hands and the traditions of men, instead of trusting in my grace?" Eli wanted to speak, to defend himself, to explain the life he had lived, the rules he had followed, the faith he had held, but the words would not come. For deep down he knew Jesus was right, knew that his life had been a pursuit of righteousness, a pursuit of rules, a pursuit of appearances, rather than a pursuit of the one who could truly save him. "I'm sorry," Eli whispered, tears streaming down his face, his voice trembling with the weight of his regret. "I didn't know. I thought I was doing what you wanted. I thought the rules would save me." Jesus knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder, a touch that filled Eli with warmth, with healing, with a love that spoke of redemption. "Eli," he said, "I have been with you all along, waiting for you to turn to me. The rules cannot save you, but my love can. My grace is enough." In that moment, the light surrounding Jesus grew even brighter, its warmth washing over Eli, healing wounds he didn't even know he had, filling him with a peace that transcended understanding, a peace that spoke of a Savior, of a grace, of a love that was freely given, undeserved, unconditional. Eli realized then that it wasn't about how well he followed the rules, how hard he worked, how obedient he appeared, but about accepting the love of Christ, the grace of Christ, a gift that required nothing but offered everything. As he knelt in Jesus' presence, Eli knew that his life was about to change forever. The darkness that had consumed him, gone in the light of his love. The fear that had bound him, replaced by a freedom he had never known. A freedom that spoke of redemption, of grace, of a relationship with the one who had saved him. Jesus extended his hand, and as Eli took it, he felt a peace that he knew would never leave. A peace that filled him with hope, with purpose, with a love that could not be contained. The journey was not over, but he was no longer afraid, for he had found the truth and it had set him free. As the light pulsed with warmth and life, Jesus stood before Eli. His expression filled with love, with purpose, a presence that spoke of a father's care, a savior's grace, a king's authority. Eli felt like a child, fully known yet fully accepted, unworthy to stand in his presence, yet welcomed with a love that transcended his failures. A love that spoke of redemption, of a new beginning, of a life forever changed. Eli, Jesus said, his voice steady, clear, filled with a power that resonated in Eli's soul. I am giving you a second chance. You have seen the truth, and now you must live it. The life you return to will not be the same, but you are not the same either. What you have been shown is not for you alone. It is for those I am calling you to reach. His words both comforted and overwhelmed Eli. The thought of returning to the world, to the life he had known, filled him with both hope and dread. But he knew he could not remain in this place. Not yet, for there was a purpose waiting for him, a mission far greater than he could understand. You have lived a life of obedience to the rules, Jesus continued. But now I am calling you to live a life of obedience to me. Rules have their place, but they were never meant to replace a relationship with me. Many in your community are trapped, believing their worth is tied to their works. Just as you did, I am sending you back to show them the truth of my grace, the truth of my love. As he spoke, scenes unfolded before Eli, not of his past, but of what could be a vision of the future, a vision of the lives he could touch, the hearts he could reach, the souls he could lead to the Savior. He saw himself standing before members of his community, men and women he had known his entire life, brothers and sisters who had shared in his labor. In his worship, in the rules that had bound them together, he saw himself sharing his story, speaking of the darkness, of the light, of the love of Jesus, of the grace that had set him free. At first they looked at him with skepticism, with hostility, their faces hard with the fear of change, with the weight of tradition, with the belief that his words were a betrayal, a threat to the life they had always known. But as he spoke, some began to soften, their eyes filling with tears, their hearts recognizing the burdens they had carried, the striving they had endured, the fear that had bound them, just as it had bound Eli. He saw families healed, relationships restored, a joy that had long been missing begin to spread among them, a joy that spoke of the love of Christ, of the grace that set them free, of a relationship with the Savior, rather than a life of rules and fear. These are the lives you will touch. Jesus said, his voice filled with hope. If you remain faithful to the mission I am giving you. But know this, the road will not be easy. You will face rejection, even from those closest to you. Some will see your transformation as a threat, a betrayal of their way of life. The enemy will try to silence you, to pull you back into fear and doubt. But do not be afraid, for I am with you always. His words struck Eli deeply. The thought of rejection, of being alienated from his own people, filled him with dread, a fear that threatened to pull him back, to silence the truth he had found. But as he looked into Jesus' eyes, he felt a strength that was not his own, a courage that spoke of the Savior's presence, a peace that spoke of his promise. He realized that this wasn't about him, wasn't about his comfort, wasn't about his acceptance, but about Jesus, about the mission he had given, about the lives he longed to reach, through the testimony of a man who had been set free. Jesus, Eli said, his voice trembling. How will I know what to say? How will I face the challenges ahead? Jesus smiled, a smile that melted every fear, a smile that spoke of a love that would never leave. You already know what to say. Eli, speak the truth you have seen, share the grace you have received. And when you face challenges, remember this, my strength is made perfect in your weakness. You do not need to rely on your own abilities. I will equip you for every step of the journey. As he spoke, Eli felt a wave of peace wash over him, a peace that filled him with confidence, with trust, with a certainty that he did not need to have all the answers, that he only needed to take one step at a time, to let Jesus guide him, to let his love lead the way. Eli, Jesus said, his tone growing softer but no less powerful. The life you return to will be different, but it will be abundant. You will walk in freedom, not fear. You will know my love, not just as a concept, but as a reality, and you will share that love with others, not through rules, but through relationship. Eli nodded, tears streaming down his face, his heart filled with a resolve he had never known. I will do it. He said, I will share what you've shown me. I will trust you. Jesus placed his hand on Eli's shoulder, a touch that filled him with warmth, with strength, with a love that spoke of eternity. Go, Eli, he said, your mission begins now. The light around them began to shift, growing softer, its warmth remaining in Eli's heart. Even as the vision faded, even as the radiance of Jesus' presence gave way to the world he had left behind, he felt himself being pulled back. The peace and purpose he had found, a steady flame within him, a flame that would guide him, that would sustain him, that would lead him through the journey ahead. When Eli opened his eyes, he found himself lying on the side of the road, surrounded by paramedics, their faces tense with urgency, their voices a distant hum against the memory of divine words. The pain in his body was intense, a reminder of the crash of the life he had left behind, but it paled in comparison to the peace that filled his soul, a peace that spoke of a Savior, of a grace, of a love that had changed him forever. In the days that followed, Eli began to recover, his body healing from the accident, his soul renewed by the encounter that had transformed him. At first, he kept the details of his near-death experience to himself, needing time to process, to pray, to seek wisdom about how to share what he had seen, what he had learned, what he had been called to do. But as the days turned to weeks, the urgency in his heart grew stronger, a fire that could not be quenched, a mission that could not be ignored. Jesus had given him a second chance, a chance to live in his grace, a chance to share that grace with others, a chance to lead them to the truth, and he could not stay silent. The first time he shared his story was at home around the dinner table with his family, the simple wooden table where they had shared countless meals, countless prayers, countless moments of fellowship. He told them everything, the darkness that had consumed him, the light that had saved him, the love of Jesus that had filled him, the mission he had given, the grace that had set him free. The room fell silent as he spoke, his mother wiping tears from her eyes, her hands trembling with a mixture of awe and fear, his younger siblings listening wide-eyed, their faces filled with wonder, with questions they dared not ask. But his father's face remained stoic, his eyes hard with the weight of tradition, with the fear of change, with the belief that the rules were the only path. When Eli finished, his father leaned back in his chair, his voice steady, but filled with a warning. Eli, what you're saying, it goes against everything we've been taught. The ordning is the foundation of our faith. Without it, there's only chaos. I'm not saying the ordning is bad, Eli replied, his voice steady but firm, but it's not what saves us. Jesus showed me that it's his grace, not our works, that gives us freedom, that gives us life. The rules should point us to him, not replace him. His father's expression hardened. Be careful, Eli. Questioning the ordning is dangerous. It can lead you down a path away from the community, away from everything we stand for. Eli knew his father's words came from a place of fear, not malice. A fear rooted in a lifetime of tradition, a fear of losing the unity of the community, a fear of straying from the path they had always known. But Eli also knew he could not let that fear silence him, could not let it keep him from the mission he had been given, could not let it dim the light of the truth he had found. Over the weeks and months that followed, Eli began sharing his testimony more widely, speaking to members of his community, men and women he had known his entire life, brothers and sisters who had shared in his labor, in his worship, in the rules that had bound them together. At first, the response was cautious curiosity, people intrigued by his story, but hesitant to fully embrace the message of grace, to let go of the rules that had defined their lives, to step into a relationship with Christ, rather than a life of striving. Some listened with tears in their eyes, confessing that they too had felt the weight of striving, the fear of falling short, the longing for a connection with God, a connection they had never truly known. Others were more resistant, their faces hard with skepticism, their voices sharp with accusation. You're abandoning the teachings that have guided our people for generations. You're sowing division, you're leading us astray. The opposition grew stronger as word of his testimony spread. Some elders in the community warning others not to listen, labeling him a troublemaker, a threat to the unity of the Amish way of life. A man who had strayed from the path, who had turned his back on the rules that held them together. Eli was called before a council of church leaders, men he had known his entire life, men who had taught him, guided him, shaped his faith. Now sitting in judgment, their faces a mixture of disappointment, of concern, of fear. Eli, one elder, said, his voice heavy, "You've always been a faithful member of this community. Why are you sowing division with these ideas? Why are you challenging the ordinum, the foundation of our faith?" "I'm not trying to divide anyone," Eli replied, his voice steady, his heart filled with the peace of Christ. "I'm trying to point people to Jesus. He showed me that it's not about the rules, it's about knowing him, living in his grace. That's the message I've been called to share." Their faces remained hard, their eyes filled with skepticism, with sadness. And Eli left the meeting knowing he was walking a lonely path, a path that would test his faith, his courage, his resolve. But even in the face of rejection, he felt a deep sense of peace, a peace that spoke of Jesus' presence, a peace that reminded him he was not alone, a peace that sustained him through the storm. Despite the resistance, Eli began to see the seeds of change taking root. Hearts softening, lives transforming, the truth of grace spreading like a quiet fire, a fire that could not be quenched, a fire that spoke of the love of Christ, of the freedom he offered, of the relationship he longed to have with his people. One day, a young man named Caleb approached him after church, a man who had always been quiet, reserved, his face often shadowed with the weight of unspoken doubts, now filled with a mixture of desperation and hope. "Eli," he said, his voice trembling, "I've felt the same doubts you described. I've followed the ordinance my whole life, but I've never felt close to God. I want to know him like you do. Can you help me?" Hearing those words filled Eli's heart with joy, a joy that spoke of the mission he had been given, a joy that spoke of the lives Jesus longed to touch. Through the testimony of a man who had been set free, they began meeting in secret, praying together, studying the Bible. Eli sharing the truth he had found, Caleb listening with an open heart, his faith growing stronger, his life transforming, his soul finding the peace, the freedom, the love of Christ, a love that filled him with joy, with hope, with a new beginning. Caleb's transformation inspired others, and soon small groups of believers began forming, quietly seeking a deeper connection with God, beyond the rules, beyond the traditions, beyond the fear that had bound them. They met in barns and homes, their voices hushed, their prayers fervent, their hearts open to the grace of Christ, to the relationship he offered, to the freedom he had died to give. It wasn't an easy journey. The opposition did not go away. The rejection did not cease. But every moment of challenge, every moment of doubt was met with the presence of Jesus. His promise, a steady anchor, his love, a guiding light, his grace, a source of strength. As Eli looks back on those first months, he sees how God was working. Even in the hardest moments, the seeds of grace and truth spreading, bringing hope to places where there had been only fear, only striving, only the weight of rules that could never save. He knows the journey is far from over, knows there will be more challenges, more rejection, more moments of doubt. But he also knows he is walking the path Jesus has set before him, a path of grace, a path of love, a path of freedom. He wakes each day with a renewed sense of purpose, no longer bound by fear, no longer weighed by striving, no longer wondering if he is enough, for he knows he is loved, not because of what he has done, but because of what Jesus has done for him. A love that has transformed him, a grace that has set him free, a relationship that fills his days with joy, with hope, with a mission to share that love with others. For every rejection, there is a moment like Caleb's, a heart opened, a life transformed, a soul set free by the grace of Christ. And that makes every step of the journey worth it, every challenge a testament to the power of God's love, every trial a reminder of his promise, I am with you always. Eli's life is no longer the same. The fear, the striving, the constant weight of wondering if he was enough are gone, replaced by a peace that comes from knowing he is loved, a peace that comes from walking with Jesus, a peace that speaks of a grace beyond the rules, a grace that has changed him, a grace that he will share for the rest of his days. To those who hear his story, Eli offers a simple truth, a truth that changed his life, a truth that can change yours. Grace is available to you, no matter where you've been, no matter what you've done, no matter the rules you've followed or the burdens you've carried. You don't need to earn God's love. It's already yours, a gift freely given, a gift that requires only your trust, only your surrender, only your heart. Rules and traditions have their place, but they were never meant to replace a relationship with Jesus, a relationship that offers freedom, that offers peace, that offers a life defined by his love. If you feel lost, if you feel burdened, if you feel the weight of striving, of fear, of wondering if you are enough, call out to him. He is waiting with open arms, ready to forgive, ready to heal, ready to make you new. Trust in his grace and you will find the freedom you've been searching for. A freedom that transcends the rules, a freedom that leads to the heart of the Savior, a freedom that is yours in the grace beyond the rules.